The night was a suffocating blanket pressed against the squad car's windshield, thick with the smell of pine, damp earth, and something metallic, something subtly wrong. Patrolman Alex Sterling had seen his share of dark nights in Blackwood County, but this one felt different. It was heavy, silent, and the air seemed to drink the meager light from the moon and his cruiser's headlights. Alex wasn't a veteran. Only 3 years on the job, enough time to shed the rookie jitters, but not enough to develop the protective cynicism of the older officers. He was a good cop, diligent, and currently profoundly bored. His partner, Officer Lena Reyes, was slumped in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, the glow a small, blue island in the surrounding blackness. "Anything on the scanner, Sterling?" Reyes asked, her voice tight with routine. "Nothing but static and the occasional whisper of a trucker," Alex replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just another dead night. Dead is good in this part of the county. Remember what Sergeant Thorne always says. If you're bored on Blackwood Hill, you're doing your job right." Blackwood Hill. The name itself felt like a myth whispered around campfires. It was a dense, isolated tract of land bordering the county line, notorious for its labyrinthine network of unpaved service roads, abandoned mines, and the unnerving frequency of minor disappearances. Lost hikers, runaways who never returned. Nothing ever stuck. No bodies, no compelling evidence, just missing persons reports that eventually withered into cold cases filed under presumed fleeing. They had been assigned a routine property check, an old, decommissioned Forest Service substation deep in the woods. The station, officially designated Outpost 7, was a small, prefab aluminum shack used mostly for storing emergency gear and as a rarely used shelter for rangers. The department had received a digitized motion alert from an ancient, barely functional sensor near the back door. It was almost certainly a raccoon, but protocol was protocol. Alex drove the cruiser down a track barely wide enough for one vehicle, the branches clawing at the paint. When they finally reached the clearing, Outpost 7 looked less like a building and more like a decaying tooth. The aluminum siding was scratched and dull, and the single porch light was a sickly yellow eye. "Raccoon or not, something set off that sensor," Alex said, pulling the flashlight from his belt. "Stay here. Lena, cover the back. I'll take the front." "Got it," Reyes said, retrieving her own light, her tone instantly snapping to professional. The air inside the outpost was colder than the outside, stale and heavy with the scent of dust and mildew. Alex swept his beam across the room. It was sparsely furnished, a fold-out cot, a rusted metal desk, a few shelves. Everything was coated in a fine layer of gray dirt. There was no sign of forced entry, no smashed glass, no overturned furniture, certainly no scared, fat raccoon. He moved to the metal desk and shone the light on a small, leather-bound book. It was a logbook, its cover embossed with the faded official seal of the Forest Service. Curiously, it wasn't dusty. It looked like it had been handled recently. Alex slipped on a pair of latex gloves and opened it. The log entries were sporadic, written in a cramped, almost frantic cursive. They dated back decades, mostly mundane notes about equipment checks and weather patterns. But the last entry, dated only 3 days ago, was different. It took up a full page, written in a hand that was less cramped and more desperate. October 24th. They told me I was crazy. They told me the last ranger went nuts from the isolation. But they don't know about the sound. It's not a person, not an animal. It's a frequency, a low, grinding, hungry hum that comes from deep in the ground. It started after the tremor last week. Now it's constant. I can hear it in the walls. I can feel it in my teeth. It's trying to. The rest of the sentence was abruptly crossed out. A violent scribble that tore the paper. Below it, in shaky capital letters, was a final, chilling note. I didn't turn off the light. I can't turn off the light. If the light goes out, IT comes in. Alex felt a cold spike of adrenaline. "Lena, get in here," he muttered into his radio, his gaze fixed on the final, desperate words. Just as Reyes's voice crackled, confirming she was on her way, the sickly yellow porch light outside the front door flickered, then died. The clearing plunged into absolute, crushing darkness. And with the silence that followed, Alex heard it. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrating in the floorboards, resonating deep in his chest cavity, and settling in the hollow space behind his eardrums that it was the sound. Alex's flashlight beam caught the empty window for a split second, and in that fleeting moment, before he could fully register the shape, he saw an immense, dark form outside the glass. Something that didn't fit the outline of a man, a bear, or any known thing. It was just a looming absence, an outline of pure, concentrated shadow, now separated from him only by the thin, aluminum wall. The humming intensified. It was no longer outside. It was inside. The sudden darkness was a punch to the gut. The hum, no longer distant, was a physical thing, a deep, throbbing vibration that made the cheap aluminum shack shudder. Patrolman Alex Sterling instinctively dropped the logbook into his jacket pocket and raised his flashlight, spinning towards the door. "Lena, what was that?" he demanded into his radio, his voice tight. Silence. Only a hiss of static answered him. "Reyes. Report." He heard a muffled, frantic scrambling from outside the back of the station, the direction Lena had taken. It was too fast, too irregular to be a struggle. It sounded like someone desperately trying to gain purchase on slick mud. Alex kicked open the front door and plunged into the overwhelming blackness of the clearing, his beam slicing wildly through the mist that had thickened around the building. The cruiser, parked 50 feet away, was an unlit, silent monument in the oppressive gloom. Lena. His light finally snagged on the figure he was looking for. Officer Reyes was not at the back door. She was midway across the clearing, frozen like a deer in the headlights, but facing towards the woods, away from the cruiser, away from the station. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, her flashlight beam fixed on a spot deep between the trees. "Alex, listen," she whispered, her voice strained, barely audible over the growing hum. "Do you hear that?" "I hear it. It's coming from the ground. Lena, get back here. Let's get to the car." "No, wait. It's clearer here." "It sounds like a whisper," she insisted, taking a hesitant step towards the treeline. Alex ran towards her, adrenaline overriding caution. When he reached her, he grabbed her arm, but her skin was icy cold and clammy. "We're leaving, Reyes. Now, something is wrong with this place." As he pulled her, her eyes, wide and unnaturally dilated, momentarily left the woods and fixed on him. "The light, Alex. The light. It's gone. It came in." "What came in?" The vibration intensified, moving from a hum to a low, powerful drone, the sound of a subterranean machine grinding to life. This time, the tremor was unmistakable. The earth beneath their worn patrol boots vibrated, and the nearby aluminum shack gave an audible groan. Lena pointed her flashlight, not at the ground, but up the slope of the hill, towards the highest, darkest peak of the Blackwood tract, the Ranger. "The last entry. He said it was a frequency, a sound that started after the tremor. But it's not just sound. Look." Alex followed her light. The peak of Blackwood Hill was almost invisible in the darkness, but now, a subtle, rhythmic pulsing emanated from it. It wasn't a visible light source. It was like the darkness itself was contracting and expanding in slow motion, a silent, internal beat that coincided exactly with the drone shaking the earth. He pulled out the logbook from his pocket, flipping back to the last page, reading the final words aloud. "If the light goes out, it comes in." He wasn't talking about the porch light, was he? Reyes said, her voice hollow. He was talking about the beacon. Alex knew the myth. The beacon, an old, isolated communications tower the county had built on Blackwood Hill decades ago, rumored to emit some kind of low-frequency warning signal. A beacon to surrounding towns in case of wildfire. It was decommissioned years ago, supposedly dismantled. The tower was scrapped. "Lena, there's nothing up there but rocks." "Then what is that?" Reyes retorted, her flashlight shaking, catching the faint, repetitive throb of the darkness on the hill. "That's not fire, not a lantern. That's a pulse. And whatever it is, it's powering up." As she spoke, the drone reached a painful crescendo. Alex dropped to his knees, clutching his ears. The sound was no longer just a vibration. It was carving its way into his mind, inducing a crushing pressure headache. He looked at Lena, but she was swaying, her eyes rolled up slightly, a trickle of blood leaking from her left ear. "Lena, we have to go? Now!" Alex screamed, the sound lost in the overwhelming sonic assault. He managed to drag her towards the cruiser, fumbling desperately for his keys. The keys were in the ignition. He wrenched the driver's side door open and threw Reyes roughly onto the passenger seat. Before he could pull himself in, the drone stopped. The absolute silence that followed was terrifying. Alex's ears rang violently. Then, from the darkness on the hill, where the mysterious pulse had been, a single, piercing, mechanical sound ripped through the quiet. It was the high-pitched, insistent wail of a police siren, identical to the one on their cruiser, but it was coming from the center of the woods. And it was getting closer. Alex slammed the door, twisted the ignition, and watched the rearview mirror fill with the blinding, red and blue flash that was tearing through the trees behind them, heading directly for the outpost. "Buckle up, Lena," Alex gasped, shoving the gear into drive. Someone else just turned on their lights. Alex slammed his foot on the accelerator. The patrol car, a sturdy but aging Ford Interceptor, roared to life, kicking up gravel and mud as it spun out of the small clearing. He drove like a maniac down the narrow, twisting service road, using the high beams to cut through the oppressive mist. "Hold on," he yelled, bracing himself against the wheel. Lena Reyes was slumped in the passenger seat, conscious but groaning, pressing a trembling hand against her bleeding ear. "The siren, Alex, it sounded exactly like ours." "It is exactly like ours," Alex gritted out, checking the rearview mirror. "And it's gaining on us." The source of the siren was terrifyingly close now. Through the mist, Alex could make out the sharp, intermittent flashes of red and blue light, reflecting off the trees behind them. It looked like a standard Blackwood County Patrol vehicle. The same model, the same color, the same blinding light bar. "Why aren't they using the radio?" Lena whispered, clutching the dashboard. "Who was that? Thorne wouldn't send backup this deep without calling us." Alex tried the radio again, spinning the dial, trying every channel. Only static and a faint, high-pitched whine. "The frequency is jammed. Or maybe whatever was droning out here fried the receiver." He swerved violently to avoid a fallen log, and Reyes cried out, "Get the shotgun, Lena." "Just in case," Alex ordered. Reyes fumbled with the lock of the metal box bolted to the floor. The moment she pulled the heavy pump action out, the pursuing cruiser rounded the sharp bend behind them, its headlights blazing. Alex caught a good look in his mirror. It was unmistakably a Blackwood County Sheriff's vehicle, but there was something wrong with it. The body was pristine, unnaturally clean for a car driven on these roads. "And the windows, Alex, the windows," Reyes said, her voice catching. They were opaque. Black, flat panes of solid tint. "They couldn't see the driver. They're not pulling us over, Lena," Alex said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "They're trying to run us off the road." The ghost cruiser accelerated, closing the distance rapidly. It wasn't driving normally. It moved with a silent, unnatural speed and precision, hugging the turns in a way no normal driver could manage on the slick terrain. Alex fought to keep control. The cruiser was now directly on their bumper, its siren a deafening, mocking sound right behind them. "They're not slowing down." Reyes screamed in a terrifying metallic shriek. The front bumper of the pursuing vehicle slammed into their rear. Alex lost control for a fraction of a second, the car fishtailing dangerously close to the drop-off on the right side of the road. "I'm going to run it off." Alex yelled, "Hold on." He swerved hard, aiming the cruiser for a shallow ditch beside the road, hoping to force the other driver to slow or take the ditch instead. But the ghost cruiser didn't react like a vehicle driven by a human. Instead of slowing down or swerving, it matched Alex's maneuver with impossible speed, staying locked on his rear bumper, its speed unflagging. Crash. It hit them again, harder this time. The impact spun Alex's head against the window. He could taste blood. "It's not trying to stop us, Alex," Reyes shouted, leveling the shotgun, her training kicking in despite the terror. "It's trying to drive us to a specific spot." She pointed a trembling finger at the dash, where their GPS mapping system was blinking wildly. Their emergency tracking software, usually useless in this remote area, had suddenly locked onto a signal. The screen displayed a destination icon, a small, flashing red dot high up on the map. The coordinates matched the rumored location of the old, decommissioned communications tower. "The beacon. It wants us to go to the hill," Alex gasped, realizing the chilling implication. "This thing is hurting us." He didn't dare slow down. He steered frantically, following the rough path of the service road as it began a steep ascent. The slope was getting steeper, the ground rockier as they climbed. The ghostly siren abruptly cut off. The ensuing silence was somehow worse than the noise. Alex glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The cruiser was still there, but now its lights were dark. It was gliding behind them in the pitch black, a massive, silent shadow keeping perfect pace. Then, Reyes pointed through the windshield. "Look!" Emerging from the mist ahead, standing stark and monstrous against the darkness of the hill's peak, was the structure. It wasn't a demolished base. It was a massive, skeletal tower, a communications relic, and at its apex, a faint, rhythmic red light was pulsing, far brighter than it had appeared from the clearing. Alex recognized the signal. It was the old, long-retired low-frequency warning light, operational for the first time in decades. The beacon was transmitting, and at the base of the tower, illuminated by the rhythmic red pulse, stood two figures. They looked like men in uniform, but they were perfectly still, facing the incoming cruiser, their outlines distorted by the eerie light. "We're not stopping there," Alex vowed, turning the wheel sharply off the main track into a barely visible logging path. But the moment he veered, the silent cruiser behind them reacted instantly. It accelerated, not to hit them, but to pull alongside. And for the first time, Alex saw movement inside the opaque black of the driver's window. A single, white-gloved hand slowly rose and slammed flat against the glass, perfectly mimicking a human gesture of halt. Alex ignored it, accelerating deeper into the rough logging track. He risked a final glance at the passenger side. The hand was still pressed against the glass, and etched into the dust on the cruiser's glossy black paneling, Alex could faintly make out the letters of its official designation. BCHB 07 Blackwood County Highway Patrol, Outpost 7. The very number of the shack they had just left. The patrol car was theirs. Alex gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. The abrupt turn onto the logging track was reckless, but he preferred a potential rollover to being deliberately forced to that skeletal tower. "We're off the main road. We might lose it," Alex shouted over the rattling of the vehicle. He glanced at the passenger side mirror. The ghost cruiser, BCHB 07, didn't hesitate. It plowed into the brush, following their exact path with impossible agility, snapping small trees like twigs. It was silent now, its dark bulk gliding, illuminated only by their own frantic tail lights. "It knows where we are, Alex." "The tracking chip," Reyes yelled, pointing at the flashing red dot on the GPS. "It's using the same system. We need to disable the tracker." "How?" "It's hardwired." Reyes didn't wait for an answer. She reached into her utility belt and pulled out a heavy-duty tactical knife. With a grunt of effort, she stabbed the knife deep into the small, plastic casing of the GPS unit on the dashboard. Sparks flew, followed by a puff of acrid smoke. The red dot vanished. The whole screen went black. For a glorious second, Alex thought it had worked. Then, a metallic thump echoed from the roof of their own cruiser. "Did you hear that?" Alex whispered, instinctively slowing the vehicle. Thump. 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 It sounded like heavy, deliberate footsteps walking slowly across the roof of the car. It was impossible. The car was speeding up a steep, uneven incline. Alex looked into the rearview mirror one last time before pulling a sharp right. The ghost cruiser was gone. But looking up through the windshield, he saw the cause of the noise. Standing on the roof of their own moving vehicle, perfectly balanced and backlit by the pulsing red glow of the tower, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally slender, wearing the dark, recognizable uniform of the Blackwood County Sheriff's Department. Its silhouette was wrong. Too long, too thin, the head disproportionately small. The figure reached down. Alex saw a brief flash of metal, a nightstick, before the figure brought it down with shocking force against the windshield. The crack, the glass spiderwebbed directly in Alex's line of sight. "Get down." Alex screamed. He ducked, swerving violently to the left, ramming the car into the thick trunk of an old-growth cedar. The impact was brutal. The airbag exploded in a cloud of dust and the smell of gunpowder. Alex's head snapped back. His ears rang, and a searing pain shot through his shoulder. When the world stopped spinning, the only sound was the hissing of the engine block. The patrol car was crippled, wedged deep into the tree, its lights shattered. Reyes was slumped over, but alive. The gun, she coughed, scrambling to retrieve the shotgun from the floor. Alex pushed open the mangled driver's door and stumbled out. The figure on the roof was gone. In the distance, back on the main path, he heard the faint, unsettling click of a car door closing. "We walk," Alex muttered, checking his service weapon. "We head straight for the tower. It's the only landmark." They moved into the underbrush, using the intense, rhythmic red pulse of the tower as their guide. The low-frequency drone had returned, a silent pressure in their skulls, but it was now laced with an unbearable, subtle scraping sound, like massive stones being dragged over each other, emanating from the top of the hill. They reached a small, rocky clearing just below the summit. The communications tower loomed over them, a black geometry against the starless sky. The red light pulsed, casting everything in a blood-red wash, then plunging it into impenetrable shadow, repeating the cycle endlessly at the base of the tower. The two figures Alex had seen earlier were still standing. "Police, identify yourselves," Alex shouted, stepping out of the shadows, his weapon raised, the shotgun ready in Reyes's hands. The figures didn't move. They were rigid, facing the direction of the main road, their backs to Alex and Reyes. They were indeed wearing Blackwood County uniforms, complete with utility belts and hats. As the pulsing red light bathed them, Alex finally saw what was wrong. They weren't men. They were statues. They looked like they had been carved from the very black rock of Blackwood Hill, rough, jagged, and fused seamlessly with the base of the tower. They were caught mid-stride, hands resting on their weapons, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hats. They were utterly lifeless, yet they exuded an unsettling presence. "They're petrified," Reyes whispered, lowering the shotgun slightly, confusion replacing terror. Alex took a cautious step forward, his flashlight beam shaky. The uniforms were real cloth, the leather belts real leather, but underneath, the forms were solid, jet-black stone. Then, Alex's beam caught the name tag on the nearest figure's chest. P. Thorne, Sergeant Thorne, their supervisor. He had been reported missing 5 years ago, officially classified as a runaway. As Alex stared at the petrified face of his former sergeant, the red light at the top of the tower pulsed, bathing them in light. The scraping sound from above intensified, becoming a horrific, grating noise, like a drill boring into bone. Then, a new sound began, a hollow, metallic tapping from the metal girders of the tower itself, moving downward, rapidly approaching them. Tap, tap, tap. And from the radio on Sergeant Thorne's stone hip, the one fused to the statue, a faint, garbled voice crackled to life, accompanied by the persistent, resonant drone. Outpost 7. Officer P. Thorne. Requesting code 3-3. Immediate backup. I can't turn off. The voice cut off in a burst of violent static, replaced by a sound that made Alex's blood run cold. A sound of something wet and massive being slammed against the metal scaffolding directly above their heads. The garbled distress call from Sergeant Thorne's petrified radio hung in the air, a chilling echo of a 5-year-old scream. "He didn't run away," Alex whispered, staring at the stone-faced replica of his former superior. "He was stopped, and whatever stopped him is still here." The call was asking for code 3-3, Alex, Reyes said, her voice tight but focused. "Officer needs immediate assistance." But the static, and he mentioned the light again. Alex cautiously approached the stone statue. The radio was a lump of black rock fused to the hip, but the microphone cord, hardened like dried vines, dangled slightly. He reached out to touch the stone, but Reyes yanked his arm back. "Don't touch it. Look closely." She pointed her flashlight beam at the edges of the statue. Tiny, black crystalline growths were forming on the uniform fabric, spreading outward from the point where the radio was embedded. The transformation was ongoing. Even 5 years later, the metallic tapping from the tower above them stopped, replaced by a wet, heavy sliding noise, like a giant slug moving across steel. The sound of something impossibly heavy dragging itself down the girders was nauseating. "We don't have time. We need to know what Thorne was trying to warn us about." Alex insisted. He used the butt of his own service pistol to smash the hardened radio casing on Thorne's statue. The stone chipped away, revealing the electronic components underneath, still buzzing faintly with the resonant drone. Alex didn't dare touch the exposed wires. He simply positioned his own handheld radio, set to the department's main frequency, directly against the shattered rock. He was hoping to catch an induction echo of the final transmission. The speaker of Alex's radio shrieked with a deafening combination of static and the low-frequency drone. Then, through the noise, a single, horrifyingly clear sentence emerged in Thorne's strained voice. The frequency is the key. It's what keeps it awake. And the light isn't protecting us. It's a lure. The transmission dissolved into a high-pitched, insistent screech before Alex could process the meaning of the word lure. The red light at the top of the tower pulsed with blinding intensity, and the low-frequency drone intensified into a sonic weapon. The ground shook violently, throwing both officers off their feet. The wet sliding sound directly above them stopped. They looked up. The structure of the tower, bathed in the demonic red glare, seemed to twist and contort in the light. Then, from the massive maintenance platform near the top, something fell. It was a glistening, black, bulbous mass, shaped vaguely like a massive, inverted sack of muscle and fluid. It hit the first cross brace with a sickening squish thud and immediately began to cling to the steel. It was impossibly large, easily the size of a small car, yet it moved with the terrifying speed of an insect. It was covered in a thick, slick substance that reflected the red light, and it possessed multiple, whip-like appendages that flexed and grasped the metal, pulling its enormous weight down the tower. "We have to get off the hill. Now," Alex screamed, scrambling back, but the entity was too fast. It descended 20 feet in a matter of seconds. As it moved, the surrounding steel of the tower structure seemed to warp and groan, the metal becoming malleable. Reyes didn't hesitate. She shouldered the shotgun and fired 2 rounds. Boom, boom. The heavy buckshot slammed into the creature's slick, black surface. Instead of tearing the flesh, the impact was absorbed by the mass, causing only a momentary ripple. The entity didn't bleed. It seemed to momentarily dimple. The creature stopped its descent. Its large, unblinking, composite eye, a chaotic cluster of smaller, black eyes that resembled oil bubbles, slowly rotated and fixed on them. But a new sound accompanied the drone, a deep, resonating click that seemed to emanate not from the creature, but from the ground directly beneath the officers, the stone. Statues of Sergeant Thorne and the other unknown petrified officer suddenly began to vibrate violently. A fresh fissure ran through Thorne's stone arm, and a tiny, glistening, black droplet, identical to the slick coating on the descending creature, oozed from the crack. The transformation isn't complete, Reyes realized, her voice filled with despair. It's turning him into something else. The drone is doing it. They realized the chilling truth. The creature was not merely hunting them. The beacon, the drone, the frequency, it was all a massive, localized processing unit, slowly converting organic matter into the raw material for the entity. The creature's appendages flexed, tearing a sheet of steel off the side of the tower. It held the ripped metal high above its mass. Alex knew they couldn't outrun it downhill. It was faster, and the siren cruiser was waiting below. The base. Alex yelled, pointing to a small, heavy steel door set into the foundation of the tower. Access panel. Maybe we can shut down the beacon from the source. They sprinted toward the door, their every muscle burning. Just as Alex reached for the heavy steel handle, the creature, with a hideous thwack, hurled the sheet of steel it was holding. It missed Alex by inches, but it slammed into the stone figures of Thorne and the other officer. The statues shattered violently, exploding into 100 pieces of black, crystalline rock, scattering across the clearing. Alex didn't look back. He grabbed the handle and yanked. The door was heavy, rusted, and locked. "Reyes, give me the knife." As the creature above them began its final, rapid descent, Alex took the tactical knife and jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame, desperately trying to pry the heavy steel open. The creature on the tower, Blackwood's horrific, fleshy parasite, was less than 30 feet above them now. Its mass was glistening, and the air around it shimmered with the intense, low-frequency resonance. Alex could feel the metal door vibrating beneath his fingers, echoing the creature's hungry drone. "The knife's not working," Alex yelled, his voice ragged. The tactical blade bent against the thick, rusted steel. Reyes threw her body against the door, desperate to buy them time. The stone. Thorne said the light is a lure, and the statue shattered because of the impact. Alex realized. The crystalline black rock wasn't just petrified flesh. It was incredibly brittle and resonant. The creature's flung steel sheet hadn't killed the statues. It had shattered the fragile, resonant material. He scanned the ground, covered in the razor-sharp fragments of Sergeant Thorne. He grabbed a shard, a piece of Thorne's stone badge, and slammed the heavy object against the corroded steel lockbox next to the door. Crack. The lockbox shattered instantly, crumbling into dust and revealing a crude, mechanical dial and a bank of ancient, glowing vacuum tubes. The access panel for the beacon's power. Alex twisted the dial violently, wrenching it past the off setting. The vacuum tubes flickered, hissed, and then exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. Immediately, the deep, agonizing drone that had plagued them since entering the clearing vanished. The silence was startling, heavy, and absolute. At the top of the hill, the massive, red pulsing light at the apex of the tower died. The entire structure, suddenly unpowered, gave a mournful, drawn-out groan. The creature above them, which had been inching down the final girder, instantly froze. Its multiple eyes dimmed, and its large, slick body sagged, losing its aggressive rigidity. It looked, for a terrifying moment, exactly like a sack of dead, black moss clinging to the steel. Did we do it? Is it dead? Reyes breathed, her chest heaving. It's dormant, Alex said, his own body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Thorne was right. The frequency is what keeps it awake. The beacon is the power supply. He turned back to the steel door, which was now vibrating only faintly. The lock mechanism, deprived of the constant frequency that had seemingly sealed it, clicked softly. Alex threw his weight against the handle, and the heavy door groaned open, revealing a dark, tight service stairwell leading down into the bedrock. Let's go. We're not safe until we're far from here. They descended into the cold, damp dark. The air was thick with ozone and the metallic scent of wet iron. The stairwell spiraled down for what felt like 50 feet before opening into a small, circular subterranean chamber, the core of the beacon. The chamber was dominated by a single, terrifying sight, a massive, rusted, circular generator that took up half the room. Thick, insulated cables, ancient and frayed, ran from the generator up into the ceiling, feeding the tower above. But the generator wasn't powered by diesel or electricity. It was powered by a fluid. A network of clear plastic tubes snaked from the generator to 3 large, cylindrical containers set into the rock wall. The containers were filled with a viscous, yellowish-green liquid, glowing faintly under Alex's flashlight beam. And floating in the liquid of the first container, preserved and staring out with wide, pleading eyes, was the preserved head of a human being. The second container held another head, and the third, a third. Each face was distinct, each person a different victim, suspended in the glowing, horrifying fluid. Alex didn't need a name tag to know what he was looking at. This was the source of the beacon's power, a system harvesting the biological and neurological energy of its victims. Then, Reyes pointed a shaking finger at a small, brass plaque riveted beneath the central generator. Engraved on the plaque were schematics and maintenance logs for the entire power system, dating back to the tower's construction, and in tiny, precise lettering, a chilling title for the power source. Project, VRS, Vibratory Resonance System. Bioinductive Cell Korea Small. Handwritten log was taped beneath the plaque, clearly added recently, written in the same desperate hand as the Outpost logbook. They don't know the frequency is a pulse. It doesn't just keep it awake. It's a broadcast, a signal to others. When the light pulses red, it's not a warning. It's an invitation. I thought turning off the power would stop it. But the creature, it is already consuming the power source. The core is nearly empty. It will detach and hunt the source of the signal disruption. I have sealed the door. There is another way out. The mine shaft. As the final words sank in, a loud, metallic scraping sound echoed from the heavy steel door above them. The creature was waking up, its hunger overriding the dormant state. Alex and Reyes looked frantically around the small chamber. On the far side, obscured by shadow, was a small, crudely cut opening in the rock, barely wide enough for a person. It was the mine shaft. The metallic scraping at the heavy steel door intensified, growing into a wrenching, grinding sound as the creature outside used its immense, unseen strength to peel the door away from the frame. The silence of the core chamber was shattered by the sheer, desperate force of the entity. "It's tearing the door off," Reyes shrieked, sprinting toward the narrow, dark opening labeled mine shaft. The knife. Alex grabbed the bent tactical knife, slamming its handle repeatedly into the glass of the nearest bioinductive container, aiming for the floating, preserved head inside. If the power source is the lure, maybe destroying the fuel will weaken it. He shattered the glass after 3 desperate strikes. The yellowish-green fluid gushed out, hissing on the cold concrete floor. The preserved head inside seemed to immediately desiccate, shrinking rapidly into a shriveled husk before melting into black sludge. Alex didn't wait for the other two. The mine shaft entrance was barely wide enough, forcing them to squeeze in one at a time. Reyes went first, her flashlight beam disappearing quickly into the blackness. Just as Alex squeezed through, the steel door above the stairwell finally gave way. The metal shrieked one last time, followed by a heavy thud that shook the entire chamber. Alex cast one last, terrified look back. The light from his dropped flashlight caught the massive, glistening outline of the entity as it lowered itself into the chamber. It was larger than he had imagined, its black, wet surface reflecting the remaining light in the room, and its segmented, clawed appendages were already reaching for the intact biocontainers. "It's consuming them," Alex shouted to Reyes, already scrambling down the mine shaft after her. The mine was a tight, claustrophobic spiral of damp rock, timber supports, and rusty tracks. The air was colder here, smelling of sulfur and stagnant water. They were moving downhill, deep into the earth, their only light 2 beams cutting through the absolute darkness. "How deep does this thing go?" Alex gasped, his voice echoing eerily. "I don't know. Just keep going. We have to put distance between us and that thing." The path twisted sharply, and Alex slid, his hand scraping against the rough rock. He looked back up the shaft. He couldn't see the chamber, but he could hear it. The creature was generating a horrific sound, a slurping, sucking, rapid consumption that made his stomach turn. Then, the drone returned to it was fainter now, muffled by the rock, but it was back. A low, rhythmic hum that burrowed directly into their auditory canals. "It's starting up again," Reyes warned. "It must have another power source down here. Maybe what Thorne mentioned, the tremors." Alex realized the full implications of the logbook entry. The tremors weren't natural. They were the consequence of the entity's secondary power source, something deep in the bedrock. The frequency was being broadcast from the ground up, through the core chamber and out the beacon. They reached a small, underground junction. 2 rusted rails led off in 3 directions. The way they came, a small tunnel to the left and a long, straight shaft to the right. "Which way?" Alex asked, his breath ragged. "The log was taped to the beacon generator," Reyes said, trying to steady her breathing. "The ranger who wrote that was trying to escape. If he mentioned the mine shaft, he must have known the way out." Just then, they heard a sound from the main shaft behind them, the direction they had come. It wasn't the drone. It was a heavy, dragging noise, accompanied by the wet, suction cup sound of the creature's massive appendages grasping the narrow stone walls. "It's in the shaft. It's following the resonance." Alex yelled. "Right? Take the right shaft. It looks like a main haulage route." They scrambled into the long, straight tunnel. The ground here was uneven, and water pooled ankle-deep in the center. They ran for 30 seconds, the sound of the creature relentlessly tracking them. Then, Alex's foot struck something solid on the track. He stumbled. Catching himself on a rotting timber support, he pointed his flashlight down. Lying across the tracks was a thick, old-fashioned dynamite detonator box. Its handle was pulled up, and a line of frayed, insulated wire led from the box, disappearing into a fissure in the rock wall. "Dynamite," Reyes breathed, her eyes widening. "The ranger's escape plan. It's rigged to blow," Alex confirmed, grabbing the heavy metal handle of the detonator. "If we set this off, the collapse might seal the shaft. But the creature is right behind us. If we trigger it now, the blast wave could kill us both." Just as she spoke, the creature's high-pitched, resonant whistle echoed down the tunnel. It was close, Less than a minute away, Alex stared at the detonator handle, his mind racing. He had to seal the passage, but they needed time to get cleared. He spotted a crude, hand-painted symbol on the wall near the detonator. A simple arrow pointing down a small, barely visible ventilation shaft in the floor, directly beneath the detonator box. The Ranger had a secondary escape route. Alex exclaimed, "This isn't just a trap for the creature. It's a diversion. We jump down that shaft, and then we blow it." Reyes didn't argue. She lowered herself into the small, square opening. Alex followed, clutching the detonator handle. They landed hard in a narrow, muddy crawlspace. Alex immediately located the fraying wire running from the detonator above, leading down their new path. He pulled his knife and cut the wire, creating a clean break. The blast could now be triggered remotely. He looked up the ventilation shaft. He could see the faint glow of the main tunnel and hear the sickening slosh of the creature's body as it rounded the final corner, entering the section of the tunnel directly above them. Alex pulled the loose end of the detonator wire taut, giving Reyes the signal. "Now, Lena, pull, pull," Alex yelled, his voice strained with urgency. Reyes didn't hesitate. She grabbed the wire Alex was holding and yanked it sharply. A thick, resounding thunk echoed from the tunnel above them as the detonator handle snapped down. That a split second of agonizing silence followed. Then, the ground beneath them roared to life. That a concussive wave of sound and pressure slammed into the crawlspace. The air turned violently hot, filled with the smell of burnt sulfur and pulverized rock. Timber supports splintered and dust rained down in suffocating clouds. Alex and Reyes covered their heads, coughing uncontrollably as the very mountain groaned and buckled. The blast was immense. They heard the terrifying, final, resonant screech of the creature above them, a sound of agony and immense power struggling against the collapse. When the dust began to settle, the only sound was the drip of water and their own ragged breathing. "Lena, are you okay?" Alex choked out, his throat burning. I think so," Reyes gasped. Her flashlight had been knocked loose, but was still functional, pointing down the narrow, muddy crawlspace. "We sealed it. We collapsed the tunnel." Alex shone his light up the narrow ventilation shaft. The opening was completely gone, blocked by a massive, impenetrable plug of broken rock and soil. The air was heavy, but the suffocating pressure of the creature and the drone was finally, blessedly absent. They had bought themselves time, but they were now trapped deep within the earth. "We follow this shaft," Alex said, trying to regain his composure. The Ranger who rigged that explosion must have known this crawlspace was the way out. They began crawling, their hands and knees sinking into the thick, freezing mud. The space was incredibly tight, forcing them to move slowly. Alex kept his service weapon ready, though he was unsure what good it would do against rock and darkness. After what felt like an hour, the crawlspace began to widen, eventually opening into another mine tunnel, narrower and less formal than the main haulage route. Clearly a scouting or drainage tunnel, they rose, stretching their aching bodies. Alex checked his watch, 3:15 a.m. They had been on Blackwood Hill for less than 2 hours. "The air is fresher here," Reyes noted, pointing her light ahead. "It must lead outside or connect to a main air shaft." They followed the tunnel as it twisted and slowly began to ascend. It was quieter now, the silence broken only by their echoing footsteps. Then, Alex saw something glinting on the tunnel floor. He stopped and knelt down, sweeping the mud away with his gloved hand. It was a small, brass dog tag, rusted and worn. He wiped the dirt off the inscription .f.s. "Ranger, J. Peters." "J. Peters," Alex muttered. "The last Ranger. The one who wrote the logbook. He made it this far." A surge of relief mixed with dread washed over him. The Ranger had almost escaped, but something must have stopped him here. Alex's flashlight beam danced across the rock wall just past the dog tag. Scrawled onto the stone in what looked like dried mud, or something darker, was a message that the mouth is a lie. Below the message, a simple directional arrow was pointing down into a deep, water-filled fissure in the floor of the tunnel. Reyes looked from the arrow to the clear end of the tunnel, which ascended into the black. The mouth must be the end of this tunnel, the way out. Why would he warn against it? Suddenly, the floor of the tunnel began to subtly vibrate again. Not the violent drone, but a deep, rhythmic thumping that seemed to travel through the earth itself. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, geological, and impossibly powerful. "It's still alive," Alex whispered, gripping his gun. The explosion sealed the passage, but it didn't kill it. It just drove it deeper, to its original power source. As the thumping intensified, Alex pointed his light at the end of the tunnel, the mouth. He saw a dim, shifting light. It looked like the hazy gray of pre-dawn breaking through a cave entrance. If the mouth is a lie, then that light is a trap, Reyes concluded, pointing toward the arrow. The ranger went down the fissure. They approached the fissure. It was a narrow, vertical crack in the stone floor, dark and filled with stagnant water. Just as they prepared to descend, the rhythmic thumping stopped. The silence returned, but this time, it was broken by a new, localized sound coming from the tunnel entrance behind them. A sound that was utterly terrifying in its familiarity. It was a faint, high-pitched, insistent ringing. The sound of a department-issued mobile phone receiving a text message. Reyes slowly turned her light. Sitting on a small outcrop of rock 10 feet behind them, next to where they had found the dog tag, was a standard-issue Blackwood County smartphone. It had clearly survived the blast, and its screen was blinking. Alex raised his weapon, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It was their own spare phone, usually kept in the cruiser's glove box. Someone, or something, had deliberately placed it there. Reyes slowly edged toward it. The phone rang again, a familiar ringtone echoing through the mind. She finally reached it, flipping it open with trembling hands. The screen was open to a new, unsent text message, being typed out character by character. Running was a mistake. Then, the creature's whistling shriek, muffled, distorted, and impossibly close, echoed from the water-filled fissure at their feet. It was already in the drainage system, having bypassed the main collapse, waiting for them. The message on the phone, running was a mistake, glowed malevolently in the darkness. Alex and Reyes exchanged a terrified glance, the implication clear. The entity was not only alive and still tracking them, but it possessed a terrifying, analytical intelligence, and now it was directly beneath them. In the water-filled fissure, the whistling shriek echoed up from the black, stagnant pool at their feet, followed by the sound of heavy, segmented bodies displacing water. "It knows we're here. It knows we're close to the ranger's path," Alex hissed, grabbing the heavy detonator wire they had cut earlier. "The mouth is the trap," Reyes stated, pointing her light at the descending tunnel entrance again. "It wants us to choose the obvious exit. It's too quiet, too easy. The ranger's warning, the mouth is a lie, is absolute. We go down." They dropped into the water-filled fissure, plunging into the icy depths. The current was surprisingly strong, pulling them downward rapidly into a cramped, waterlogged drainage tunnel. Alex kept a death grip on the wire, letting it trail behind him. He looked back up the fissure. In the last flash of his light, he saw the phone on the outcrop blink one last time, the screen changing to a final, horrifying message. "I am the frequency." The creature's whistling shriek ripped through the water around them, agonizingly close. They were dragged quickly through the pitch-black tunnel, barely able to keep their heads above the frigid water. The current carried them through sharp bends, scraping them against the raw rock walls. The constant, rhythmic drone returned, faint but unmistakable, vibrating through the water itself. "It's amplifying its own frequency through the water," Reyes yelled, spitting out a mouthful of the bitter fluid. "It's using the tunnel to resonate." The water began to glow, faintly, at first, a pale, eerie blue, radiating from the walls of the tunnel and the surface of the water. The blue light pulsed in perfect sync with the drone, a silent, suffocating pulse that pressed against their eardrums and lungs. As the light grew stronger, they saw the walls. They were not just rock. They were covered in a network of thick, transparent, gelatinous fibers, resembling massive, glowing nerve endings, all pulsing with the blue energy. The resonance system, Alex realized with horror. The frequency isn't just broadcast from the tower. It's being channeled through these fibers. It's the plumbing for the power. The blue light allowed them to see the creature. It was not behind them. It was waiting, directly ahead, blocking the entire tunnel. The entity was partially submerged in the water, its slick, black body filling the entire passage. It wasn't moving aggressively. It was simply stationed there, its massive, segmented eyes staring directly at them. The pulsating blue light caught on its wet surface, making it look like a floating island of oily shadow. The creature didn't have to pursue them. It knew exactly where the drainage tunnel led, and it simply used the frequency and the water to guide them to its position. The drone became deafening. Alex felt an unbearable pressure behind his eyes. He realized the creature wasn't just a consumer of energy. It was a node, a massive amplifier, using the infrastructure of the old mine to resonate its power. Reyes instinctively fired her shotgun, the blast muffled and useless in the water. The buckshot simply created small, dark pockets in the creature's slick mass, which immediately sealed shut. "We can't get past it," Reyes screamed. "We're trapped." Alex gripped the coiled detonator wire. He knew the creature had to have a weakness. Something about the frequency, the light, and the way the ranger had tried to lure it to the explosion site. He looked at the glowing blue fibers that lined the walls. They were the conductors. "The wire, Lena. I still have the wire." "The copper," Alex yelled, pulling the insulated, copper detonation wire from his belt. "It must be an electrical discharge." "The frequency. We used the copper to short-circuit the resonance." He grabbed the nearest glowing fiber. It felt like a thick, cold, electrified piece of muscle. He wound the copper wire around the fiber, exposing the raw ends. The creature noticed the disruption. Its massive body began to convulse, and its whistling shriek intensified, making the water vibrate violently. Alex felt a tremendous suction force pulling him toward the entity. It was drawing him in, ready to consume him for its power. He wrapped the final piece of copper wire around the core fiber, creating a complete circuit between the creature's resonance system and the water they were floating in. A blinding, violent flash of white light erupted from the copper wire. The water around them instantly boiled. The blue fibers along the wall turned black and brittle. The creature emitted a sound that was neither a screech nor a whistle, but a deep, tearing sound, like wet paper being ripped apart. Its black, segmented eyes dimmed to dull gray. The massive body convulsed one last time, striking the wall with immense force, and then, slowly, sickeningly, it began to sink into the floor of the tunnel, dissolving into the black silt and water. The drone stopped. The tunnel was silent. Exhausted, Alex and Reyes watched the dark mass disappear. "It's gone," Reyes whispered, collapsing against the tunnel wall. "For now," Alex corrected, staring at the scarred, blackened walls of the tunnel. "But we just short-circuited its power grid. We need to find the exit before it can redirect its energy." Alex pushed himself forward, following the faint current. After 5 more minutes, the tunnel opened into a wide, subterranean lake, a massive cavern of silent, still water. And in the distance, high above the water's surface, was a small, hazy patch of gray, the true exit. They had reached the far end of the Blackwood mine system. The narrow drainage tunnel emptied abruptly into a vast, silent underground lake. The water here was still and black, reflecting the massive, arching roof of the cavern, which was lost in darkness hundreds of feet above. The air was frigid, tasting of limestone and ancient earth. They were forced to swim, their bodies aching from the ordeal. Alex kept his flashlight aimed at the only sign of hope, a hazy, faint patch of gray light high up on the far wall of the cavern, marking the true exit, a shaft leading to the surface. "The ranger was smart," Reyes whispered, her voice bouncing eerily across the water. "He found the natural drainage and the geological weak points. This is the way out." They swam for what felt like an eternity, their uniforms heavy and waterlogged. As they moved further from the tunnels, the lingering fear began to take a different, more insidious form. The absolute silence was unnatural. "Do you hear that, Alex?" Reyes finally asked, treading water. "Hear what?" "It's dead quiet." "Exactly. Too quiet. My ears are ringing from the drone, but I feel like I'm supposed to hear something. Something familiar." Alex realized she was right. The sonic assault had ceased, but their minds, warped by the intense, low-frequency resonance, were still reacting. He had a profound, unnerving sensation that he had forgotten something crucial, something vital to their survival. He scanned the cavern walls with his light. The sheer scale of the space was dizzying. Above the water line, he saw the faint, rusted outlines of old mining equipment, pulleys, chains, and a collapsed wooden scaffold that jutted precariously out over the lake. "We need to get to that scaffold," Alex decided. "We can climb out of the water and use those chains to reach the exit shaft." As they pulled themselves onto the rough, moss-covered wood of the scaffold, the hallucinations began. "Alex," Reyes said suddenly, her voice flat, pointing across the black water. "Look." Alex pointed his light. He saw nothing but the still, inky surface of the lake. "What is it, Lena?" "The cruiser. BCHB-07. It's floating there, with the lights on." Alex shook his head, grabbing her arm. "Lena, no. That's the reflection of your own flashlight on the water. The cruiser is wrecked miles away. It's the frequency getting to you." Reyes pulled back, her eyes wide and fixed on the illusion. "But I can't hear the siren." "Faintly. It sounds like they're waiting for us to come to them." Alex looked down at his own reflection in the water, which seemed to warp and shimmer. He was suddenly overwhelmed by the smell of pine and damp earth, the smell of the clearing, and he heard Sergeant Thorne's voice, clear as a bell, whispering in his ear, "I didn't turn off the light, Alex. I can't turn off the light." He slammed his fist against the wet wood of the scaffold to clear his head. "It's a residual effect, Lena. The frequency is still in the rock, still in the water. It creates sound hallucinations and pulls us toward the light, toward the lure." They began the precarious climb up the rusted chain ladder that led to the exit shaft. The metal was slick and cold, biting into their gloved hands. Halfway up the sheer wall, the psychological manipulation intensified. Reyes stopped, leaning her head against the wet stone. "Wait," she murmured. "I just remembered something. My younger sister, Maya. She didn't run away 5 years ago, Alex. She went missing near Blackwood Hill. I never told anyone." Alex stopped, his heart sinking. "Lena, stop climbing. Don't look down. I just realized something else," she continued, her voice filled with a terrible, misplaced calm. "When we looked into that biocore, at those floating heads, the one in the middle, that was Maya." Her revelation was a punch to Alex's gut. The creature had used its resonance to dredge up her most painful memory, weaving it into the core's gruesome truth. "Lena, that's not Maya. It's an image. A lie. You saw a man's head. You're projecting. Keep climbing." But Reyes began to climb down, back toward the water. "I have to get her out. I can't leave her down here." Alex reached up and grabbed her by the collar of her uniform, anchoring her to the ladder. "You will not. We don't die here because of a lie. The creature is using your fear to pull you back to the water, back to its territory. Fight it." He slapped her hard across the face. The shock of the contact broke the spell. Reyes gasped, her eyes blinking rapidly. The image of the floating cruiser and her sister momentarily replaced by the cold, hard reality of the cavern. "Alex." "I climb, Lena. We're almost there." They scrambled up the last few feet of chain and pulled themselves into the exit shaft, a small, vertical hole carved out of the ceiling. The faint gray light was no longer hazy. It was a clear sign of pre-dawn. They began the final, desperate climb. Just as they reached the point where they could touch the cold, fresh soil of the surface, a new sound echoed up from the cavern below. It was the whistle. But this time, it was different. It was distorted, gargled, and chillingly accompanied by a wet, high-pitched imitation of a human cry for help, reverberating up the shaft. "It's trying to lure us back." Alex gasped, shoving Reyes out of the shaft. As Alex strained to climb out, he looked down one last time. The immense, cavernous space below was plunged into absolute darkness, but the water in the lake began to shimmer violently. And in the center of the lake, directly beneath the exit shaft, a massive, black oil-slicked segment of the creature, too large to have been fully destroyed, slowly began to rise from the depths. Its surface pulsed, not with the drone, but with a faint, internal, and chilling red light. The beacon was damaged, but the monster was still broadcasting. Alex used the last reserves of his strength to haul himself out of the exit shaft, collapsing onto the cold, dewy ground beside Reyes. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and imminent morning. The faint gray light of pre-dawn broke the horizon. They had survived the night. They were on a steep, wooded slope, far from the summit and the old service road. Alex quickly covered the exit shaft opening with loose rocks and thick brush, trying to conceal the only ingress/egress point to that subterranean hell. "We need to move, fast," Alex rasped, checking his weapon one last time. It was soaked and mud-caked, likely useless. "The cruiser," Reyes reminded him, her voice hoarse. "The silent one, BCHB-07. It's still out there, and it knows where the roads are." They started downhill, keeping to the thickest cover. Their uniforms were torn, their faces streaked with mud and blood, and they were running on pure adrenaline and terror. The psychological damage remained. Every rustle of leaves sounded like the creature's slithering, and every shadow seemed to hold the unnerving silhouette of the stone statues. After 10 minutes of scrambling through the undergrowth, they reached a narrow, barely paved back road, the main route that circled the base of Blackwood Hill. Freedom was close. Alex looked up at the sky. Dawn was breaking fast, painting the eastern horizon in pale oranges and pinks. They were close to the county line, maybe a mile from the nearest habitable zone. Suddenly, Reyes stopped, her eyes fixed down the road. "Don't move," she whispered, pulling Alex behind the trunk of a massive oak. Rounding a gentle curve half a mile down the road, heading slowly towards them, was a vehicle that was their cruiser. BCHB-07. The one they had crashed into the cedar tree. But it wasn't wrecked. It was perfectly clean, pristine, its paint glossy in the breaking light, and its light bar was silent and dark. The cruiser passed directly in front of their position, gliding silently. Alex confirmed the horrific detail. The windows were solid, opaque black, with no visible driver. The white-gloved hand was gone, but the vehicle felt like a hunter patiently patrolling its territory. "It's looping back," Alex realized. "It's not driving. It's programmed to patrol the area, waiting for us to emerge onto a main route." As the ghost cruiser moved past, disappearing around the bend, Alex grabbed Reyes's arm. "We run the opposite way. We have to reach the county line. The creature seems confined to Blackwood County's jurisdiction." They sprinted down the road, away from the cruiser's direction of travel. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs threatened to give out. After a few desperate minutes, they reached a distinct, weathered wooden sign marking the jurisdictional boundary. "Welcome to Oak Ridge." Alex threw himself past the sign, dragging Reyes with him. He collapsed onto the opposite side of the road, gasping for air, his vision swimming. They lay there for a long minute, listening only to their labored breathing. The air here, on the Oak Ridge side, felt palpably lighter. The low-frequency pressure in Alex's skull immediately subsided. The psychological static was gone. "We made it," Reyes whispered, tears streaming down her dirty face. Alex, however, didn't feel relief. He felt a chilling certainty. He slowly sat up and looked back across the county line. The road was empty. The silent cruiser was gone. The atmosphere was calm, but sticking up from the ground, right at the base of the Blackwood County sign, was a single, small, hand-painted wooden stake. Alex crawled forward and pulled it from the soft earth. It was a marker, the kind used by surveyors or forest rangers, and nailed to the top of the stake was a small, crudely cut piece of crystalline black rock, a fragment of what had once been Sergeant Thorne. Alex turned the rock over in his palm. It was vibrating, faintly, with a residual, low-frequency hum, and scratched into the side of the stake, barely visible, was a single, cryptic symbol, a jagged, spiral shape identical to the symbol the last ranger had painted near the detonator in the mine. Alex looked up at the Blackwood Hill, looming dark and silent against the rising sun. The beacon was dark, the creature dormant, but the Blackwood line, the jurisdictional boundary, was simply a formality. The creature's network, its frequency, and its hunting technology were clearly still operational. "It knows we left," Alex said, his voice flat with horror. "The fragment is a message. It's a tracking beacon." He looked at Reyes, whose eyes reflected the terrible certainty. They had escaped the mine, but the creature had allowed it. It had marked them, and it was waiting for the perfect time to activate its next lure. "We have to go to Thorne's old files," Reyes said, urgency replacing exhaustion. He mentioned the frequency was a broadcast, an invitation. "We need to find out who or what it's inviting." They reached the Blackwood County Sheriff's Department office in the first light of dawn. They looked like refugees, soaked, bruised, and covered in mine dust. Alex walked past the desk sergeant, ignoring the stunned queries, and headed straight for the restricted cold case archives. Reyes immediately went to a secure phone line, placing a terse, urgent call to Internal Affairs, reporting an active, non-human threat and the destruction of BCHB 07 and Outpost 7. She knew the reports would sound insane, but she had to start the paper trail. Alex found Sergeant Thorne's file, a thick, yellowing folder labeled P. Thorne, missing/presumed fleeing. He opened it, his hands shaking, and began tearing through the documents, looking for any mention of the beacon, the frequency, or the ranger, J. Peters. Buried deep in the file, under a stack of irrelevant surveillance reports, was a handwritten, heavily redacted memo. It was dated 6 months before Thorne's disappearance. The memo was addressed from Thorne to the county sheriff, detailing a disturbing discovery during a routine property check near the summit of Blackwood Hill. During an investigation into the strange death of FS Ranger J. Peters, found desiccated near the old mine exit, I found an unauthorized, heavily shielded satellite uplink attached to the decommissioned beacon tower. It was not a maintenance link. It was a sophisticated, high-power broadcast array transmitting a complex, repeating data packet over a low-frequency band, 0.1 Hz, that is physically intolerable to humans at close range. I believe the beacon was not built as a fire warning system, but as an invitation to an entity that thrives on localized bioelectric consumption. The frequency is not a sound. It is a signal. The creature, Entity 7, as designated by Peters, is not native to Blackwood. It is responding to the transmission. The stone petrification, the silent cruisers, these are defense/enforcement mechanisms activated by the signal to neutralize anyone who approaches the tower while the broadcast is active. I believe the entire region is under a local quarantine enforced by this entity's influence. I have named the system the Blackwood Protocol. I attempted to shut down the beacon's core, but the power source, a bioinductive cell core, is self-sustaining. My final attempt will be to expose the source of the signal, the uplink, and destroy it before the next high-power transmission cycle. Alex looked at the date on the memo, October 27th, 5 years ago. He realized the high-power transmission cycle was tonight. Reyes walked over, pale-faced, after ending her call. They think I'm delusional. They're sending a psychiatrist. Forget the psychiatrist, Alex said, pointing to the date. The creature is on a cycle. Thorne knew it. The high-power transmission is tonight. We didn't kill it. We just delayed its network broadcast. If it completes the broadcast, it's not going to lure one more thing. It's going to invite more entities like itself to Blackwood. Reyes looked down at the memo, her face hardening with grim resolution. The uplink. We have to find and destroy that uplink. It's the source of the invitation. We can't go back up the hill. BCHB 07 is waiting, and we can't beat the Blackwood Protocol's defenses. Alex looked down at the fragments of crystalline rock in his palm, the piece of Thorne's badge. It was vibrating steadily. It was tracking him. But we can use its own system against it, Alex stated, a desperate plan forming. The entity uses frequency and light as a lure. We are the lure now. We need to broadcast our own destructive frequency. Alex ran to the department's evidence locker, shattering the glass and retrieving 2 items. A powerful, military-grade EM, electromagnetic, pulse generator from a seized weapons cache, and a high-power VHF-UHF radio amplifier. They raced into the parking lot, throwing the gear into an unmarked vehicle. Alex started the engine, heading out of the city and back toward the only place they knew how to fight, the road near Blackwood Hill. The tracking beacon is working, Alex said, placing the crystalline rock fragment near the dashboard. The vibration is getting stronger. It knows we're approaching the area. They stopped the car right at the county line, looking into the darkness of Blackwood County. The air was already heavy with the familiar, subtle pressure of the returning drone. Alex set up the equipment quickly, the EMP generator and the VHF amplifier, hooking them up to the car's auxiliary battery. We can't physically get to the uplink on the tower, Alex explained. But the beacon's entire defense system, the drone, the stone transformation, the ghost cruisers, they all rely on receiving that low-frequency, 0.1 Hz, broadcast. If we hit the entire system with a powerful, inverted, high-frequency blast right at the county line, we might overload the entity's network and fry the uplink. Reyes nodded, gripping the controls of the powerful amplifier. We hit the area with the opposite of what it wants. A sonic counterlure. When I hit the EMP, you hit the amplifier at full power. We have about 10 seconds before the entire system fries the car and us. Alex warned that he stared into the darkness of Blackwood. He could already hear the faint, high-pitched whistle of the creature echoing through the trees. Closing in. Click. The EMP was armed. Now, Lena. Alex screamed. Alex slammed the switch. The EMP generator fired, releasing a massive, silent burst of directed energy into the Blackwood line. Simultaneously, Reyes cranked the amplifier to maximum. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. A brilliant, blinding white flash erupted from the center of Blackwood Hill, visible miles away. The sound was not a drone or a shriek, but a single, terrifying crack that seemed to split the very I in the car. The EMF counter instantly redlined and exploded. The dashboard lights died. They were plunged into darkness. Alex and Reyes waited, their bodies trembling. Slowly, Alex turned the key. The car engine sputtered, then roared to life. The attack had been successful. They looked at the crystalline rock fragment on the dash. It was inert, cold, and silent. They had silenced the beacon and destroyed the Blackwood protocol. Alex and Reyes drove away, leaving the silent darkness of Blackwood Hill behind them. They didn't report what they found in Thorne's files or the specifics of the entity. They simply submitted a report stating that BCHB-07 had been destroyed in a flash flood, Outpost 7 was condemned due to chemical contamination, and Sergeant Thorne's case was closed after evidence confirmed his previous disappearance was due to a personal escape plan. They spoke of the cold. Nothing else. They remained on duty, forever haunted by the silence. 6 months later, they were assigned to a new, sprawling territory, Oak Ridge County, adjacent to Blackwood. During their first patrol on the new route, they pulled over for a quick coffee break, pulling up near the familiar border sign. Reyes noticed it first, tapping Alex's arm and pointing to a small, newly erected wooden stake. Identical to the one they had seen on Blackwood Hill, the IT was planted directly on the Oak Ridge County side of the jurisdictional line, and nailed to the top of the stake was a small, crudely cut piece of crystalline black rock, vibrating faintly in the morning sun.it had been waiting. It had simply changed jurisdictions. Alex drove off, never looking back. They understood now. The protocol wasn't confined to the hill. It was merely using the infrastructure. The invitation had been sent out before they destroyed the beacon, and the entity that had survived their attack was merely the first defense. It was the first sign that more were coming.